2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh my gosh. Hello everybody, welcome back to another book related video, and it is the end of the month, or actually when this is being posted it's the beginning of the month, but that means that I'm going to review my wrap up, and we have 12 books to go over. 12. That is the most I've ever done in a wrap up. I think 8 was the most, and that was just a few months ago. Technically this isn't just 1 month because I went home for a month, so it's basically like 2 months. Before we get into the books that I did read, I want to go over my TBR, or at least what I was supposed to be reading. If you haven't seen that video at all, at the beginning of October I did post my blind dog picks my TBR. First my son, I didn't record my son doing this, but my son picked 8 books, and then I had my dog choose 4 different books out of those 8 books. And from that selection, my TBR was actually Airborne by Kenneth Opel, People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, After by Anna Todd and potentially the whole series, and then Legend by Marie Lu, which also this was potentially the whole series. And let me go through which books I did and didn't read. First off, I want to start off with the books that I didn't necessarily read. Even though I was so excited about Airborne, I did not read Airborne, and that was mainly because, like I said, I went home. I didn't end up finding the book in Half Price Books or any store that I went to, and I just haven't ordered it from thrift books. I haven't really wanted to spend the money to buy a bunch of books to complete some series, so I haven't, and I probably won't be reading this for a hot minute until I go on thrift books and order the 3rd book and also some other books that I'm missing from series. The next one is After. I didn't read this book. I also didn't read the rest of the series, and mainly it's because I considered packing this book first, but then because these books are a little bit thicker, I didn't want to necessarily pack 2 books in my suitcase and then not end up reading them, so I just chose some tinier books to take with me, and I ended up on vacation anyways reading them. So I did actually read this, and I'm not going to review it in this wrap up because it's actually in last month's wrap up. I've read this literally the very last day. I finished in like 2 days, so I did read it. I just read it super early, and it's not going to be included into this wrap up. And then Legend, I read this and also the whole series, but I didn't read the 4th one, which is Rebel. I don't think I'm going to actually pick that one up at all. With last month's TBR out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into the books that I did read, all 12 of them. We're going to start off with the little trilogy that I actually finished first in the month. We have Legend, Prodigy, and then of course Champion. Legend is 305 pages, Prodigy is 371, and Champion is 369 pages long. And I read all of these pretty quickly. I kind of did a vlog on them, so if you want to watch that, you can go click on that later. But basically in this whole series, I rated this whole series 3 stars. Each book was 3 stars. I feel like overall it was 3 stars. I feel like myself in middle school would love these books, but because I'm a little bit older than middle school and high school age, I feel like this was just a little too YA, because normally when I read YA books, they're usually like 18 to 20-year-olds. I do believe they were like 16 in this book, and I just felt a little uncomfortable kind of reading some of the things that I was reading. It wasn't bad. It was a decent series. I just wasn't as intrigued. And there's also a 4th book called Rebel. I will not be picking that up because I feel like it's kind of impractical. It was added to, this was a complete trilogy, and then Rebel was added to, I think, a couple years ago, or at least a few years after this series. It's basically about Day's brother, who has always lived in Day's shadow, and I just felt like I didn't care enough about his brother to read a whole book about him. I can't really describe the last 2 because I feel like, one, it's been so long since I've read them, so that's one reason I talked about the whole vlog that I did reading them, but 2, because I don't want to spoil anything because each book leads into obviously the next one. And there's something that major that happens at the end of either Legend or Prodigy, like drastic, with one of the main characters that obviously is like life or death, and I don't want to spoil what potentially happens. The whole series is dual POV between Day and June is the female main character. Day, of course, is the male. And June is like built, she was more kind of born into like not royalty, but like a higher, wealthier family. And she became a military type family because she got a perfect score on this test, or the trials, whatever they call them. And also she was already like in college, but she was getting let go because she did so well, and she was just a troublemaker. And her brother was actually on the military's force. He was like a captain or a colonel, I can't remember. He was in charge of some people, and she ended up kind of going with him while they were trying to figure out where to put her and stuff. She ended up kind of sneaking off and being with him and going on little missions and doing all these little things. Well, one night he comes up and he kisses her goodbye, and he goes on his own little mission. He never comes back, and he ends up dying. And you get dual POV on that because Day is a suspect. She thinks automatically, you know, Day killed my brother, and she's looking for Day. She wants to go kill Day, and she ends up going around where he lives, which is like the poor area. She ends up getting in a skip fight, and Day actually saves her after she gets stabbed. And of course, she doesn't know it's Day at the time. So basically he's helping her, and I think that night or later the next day, that night, he subconsciously, while trying to sleep, he grabs for a pendant that his family, it was actually his dad's pendant. The pendant was lost the night that June's brother died, and June right away knows that that's Day she's with. Day saved her life, and Day doesn't seem like the guy that everybody talks about, but he also is potentially the guy that killed her brother. So there's this whole story, a lot of things that go on, because in the first book it's kind of like June and Day together trying to figure things out. Who killed her brother? All these secrets are divulged, and then they go into the second book and it's no longer just June and Day, it's like June and Day and these two sides. And then the third book goes on and there's like a whole kind of like a, not a war, but like a war. There's just so much stuff that happens. I feel like they weren't bad at all. I just wasn't as intrigued to read them as I was hoping to be, but I'm very glad I did read them. While we were home, I didn't know which book to read next, so I just picked up a random Nancy Drew book that I actually bought at Half Price Books in like a little reading files case. At 160 pages, we have Tall, Dark, and Deadly. Pretty much this book is about Ava Woods, a college student who goes missing, and of course Nancy has to go try and solve the case. And there ends up being, one time when Nancy gets trapped somewhere, there ends up being a guy who ends up dying. Nancy is the only person around, and of course one authorities show up. You know how it goes with Nancy Drew books. And so basically she's just trying to find Ava Woods, and Ava Woods also has a history of running away, or at least once. So nobody knows if she's really ran away or if somebody kidnapped her, because also at this college they have like a dating service, and basically Ava was on a date, or she was supposed to be at a date, and then all of a sudden she went missing. So it was kind of suspicious, and Nancy was trying to figure out who she was supposed to be on the date with, or who she did go on the date with. Of course, if you read Nancy Drew books, you already know she solves the case. So I rated this one 3 stars as well. I just needed a short little pick-me-up type book because I wasn't sure what to read. Fast forward a few weeks, because I didn't touch a book for a very long time. I feel like we were actually in Huntington Beach at that air show, the Pacific Air Show, and I ended up reading They Both Die at the End. This is 368 pages. I did rate it 4 stars, and I enjoyed the basic concept of the book. It's basically two random strangers. They become friends because they're both dying, obviously with the title, and they end up meeting from an online, kind of like a chat room for people dying, and basically they meet up, they become friends. And I like the little day-to-day, well, not day-to-day, but hour-to-hour adventures, I'm gonna call them, that they went on. They basically lived their life on their last day. I feel like that was a very good plot, a very good concept of the book. There were some parts that were kind of slow or hard to get into, but other than that, I feel like it went by really quickly. I don't know, it might have been because I was on vacation. I was really enjoying this book. For some reason, I was just reading a lot of pages. I did not, however, because these are two male main characters, I did not like at all how they weren't just friends. It transpired into more than just friendship. I don't like that. I'm gonna be real honest. I don't like care much for reading that stuff. That was my only downside to this book. I felt like it wasn't too much to like ruin the whole book, but at the same time, it was just, I feel like, unneeded. They were fine as friends. It was perfectly fine as friends. And I didn't know any of that was going to happen going into it. I also don't feel like I need to read the book before, or I think technically after. That's called The First to Die at the End. I am fine with just reading this book. I felt like this one was enough. And then also at Huntington Beach, I found a 5-star read with 314 pages. It is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I know what you guys probably are thinking, because Colleen Hoover had like her downfall, because I think it was because the calendar is what I've heard, but I've been seeing other things. I don't keep up with the drama, but her books and a lot of old book talk, booktube books are starting to hit thrift stores. So I picked this up. I ended up taking it on vacation, and when I was out at the beach and just out in the hotel room and just on vacation, I felt like these vibes were so good. She wrote this book so good, and I was so excited to finish this book. I read it in like, technically it was like 2 days, and we were also busy. Like, we were going out getting supper, we were going doing stuff all day long, and I still had time to read like 150 pages somehow. I was intrigued the whole time. The whole plot of this, because basically it's about one writer, one writer, she is asked to go to this guy's house who is her husband, Verity's husband, finish writing, because Verity has had basically like an accident and she's not necessarily functional enough, or so they say, to be able to write. So she's trying to finish out her series of book writing because they have similar writing styles and everything like that. And Lawan ends up finding a manuscript or an autobiography of Verity, and she finds some disturbing things. And then of course you're reading on the edge of your seat trying to read and finish this. And there's just some things that happen. There's some things that are very bad in this book, but at the same time, it just keeps the suspense up. And then you get to the very end, and then it's the whole question of, was all of this true or was it not? And then of course, with things that went on, it was just a very great read. I had so much fun. I was watching a movie while reading this. I was so happy to read this, and I was just very much entrapped into the book. And I also found a special edition, or the Barnes & Noble's exclusive edition, at a thrift store, and I read that last chapter that Colleen added to it. No offense, but I feel like this book left off on a good enough, kind of like a cliffhanger to where you can make up your own ending if it was real or not. I feel like it was just unnecessary. But Verity itself, I love this book. I absolutely, hands down, if Colleen Hoover wrote all of her books, which this is the first and only book I've ever read from her, if she would write all her books like this, and especially like the suspenseful type books, I think I would enjoy every single one of them. Next, we have a little duology, and technically these are like standalones, but in the same world. They're interconnected, but it's just a duology. It is Sky in the Deep and also The Girl the Sea Gave Back. These are both by Adrena Young, or some people, I think Haley Pham said Adrian. I say Adrena because I know of somebody who spells their name like this and pronounces it Adrena. So I'm gonna continue, sorry if I'm saying it wrong, but I'm gonna continue saying Adrena just because that's what I'm used to. And basically this is like a Viking Norse type duology. The first one is 335 pages. The second one is 324. I've rated both of them 4 stars. She is the author of Fable, and I love that series. It was like a 5-star series, or at least the 2 duology, and then the other 2 books, Saint and The Last Legacy, were 4 stars. These 2 books were 4 stars. I enjoyed them. I just didn't get into them as much, and it might have been the names and the words and how to pronounce everything. In the first one, you just have 2 different tribes or 2 different territories. They've always fought each other. Somehow our female main character ends up on opposite enemy territory, and I don't want to say necessarily how because I feel like it's gonna spoil the whole plot of the book, but basically she ends up on enemy territory, and while she is over there are these, like, they call them like demon spirits or something. They come over and they raid every land or everybody's village, and they do a lot more than just raiding them and killing people, but basically they're out there, and she is of course on enemy territory where she doesn't know if her father is still alive. So now she's trying to get back, and she's working with another, I'm gonna call him another main character, or he's at least a very higher up character. His name is Fisky. Her name is Eileen. The whole overall story, and of course obviously Adrena Young always puts like this smallest touch of romance. It's like the smallest subplot of romance in all her books, and I feel like it's done so well because it's like towards the end, so it's a little bit of a slow burn, but you can feel it earlier, and I just feel like the relationship building was just so good, and also seeing how Fisky was in general. Love that. I love all of her books, and I just always have such a fun time reading her books. And then when we go into The Girl the Sea Gave Back, pretty much like I said, we're in the same world, but this is like 10 years later, and you do have a few characters from the first book. They're kind of like on the back burner. A few are very prominent in this book, and basically this girl, when she was 6 or 8, she ended up dying, and her family tradition, of course, was putting her on a boat and burning the boat and sending her off at sea. It's a funeral at sea. For some reason, the sea decided not to accept a funeral, so she ended up going somewhere else, or the sea took her someplace else, some other territory. She was found at 6 or 7 years old alive, and they accepted her to a point. They didn't really accept her, but somebody fought for her, and then they eventually they allowed her to be there. They didn't necessarily respect her or anything. She was like a fortune teller in a way. So pretty much she would ask a question like, oh, what's the future of my village? And then she would read the stones after throwing them down, and they would be like, oh, this fire is gonna happen, and you know, this big wave's gonna crash out with a tsunami, and this person's gonna die. You know, that type of stone throwing has a few different things that happen, and I feel like I don't want to spoil a lot of things in this book either, because I feel like they'll kind of go hand in hand, because you have to read the first one a little bit to understand more so this book and what all went down with the wars and the coming together and stuff like that. She ends up running away, but also saving the area, the land, and I just don't want to spoil it. But definitely both of these books, 4 stars. All her books look so great together. I mean, the 2 spines look a little bit different compared, but when you line them up next to Fable, they look so perfect, all of them together, except for every other one, her name is in opposite spots, so I don't like that. Next, at 297 pages, I read this book. I started it, put it down for like a month maybe, and then picked it up because I got new books. I got way too excited, and I was halfway through this book. It is The Heart and the Fist. It's basically just about a humanitarian turned Navy SEAL, his life. It's just like a autobiography, memoir, whatever you want to call it. And I rated this 3 stars. I know you shouldn't necessarily rate memoirs and autobiographies because you can't necessarily rate somebody's life, but I like these books. I love the military style books, and I love reading about them, and he just had so many great things to say. I feel like there's not much I can really talk about except for some of the places he went, like Iraq, Afghanistan, Southeast Asia. He went a few different places for the SEALs, and then of course when he was doing humanitarian work, I think he went to Kenya. There was a couple places in different parts of Africa, and then there was some around England because he went to school in England. It was a decent read and I enjoyed it. We then get into my second 5-star read this month. I was so excited to read this book. So excited to read this book. And I'm so glad I finally got to. It is 432 pages and it is Throne of Betrayal by Brianna Wilson. And I went to school with her and I was not expecting this book to be what it was because this is her first book, first published book basically. And you know, I was thinking it wasn't going to be, as no offense, as great writing as it was. I thought maybe because it's your first book, you have to write books in order to learn more from your books. And I know she's been working, or she used to write on Wattpad and everything like that. I felt like this book just should have not have been so great from literally page 1. The whole prologue was just so good. I was obsessed with this book. I was watching a movie the whole entire time. I feel like that's why I rate a lot of books 5 stars. I was watching a movie the whole time. I'm so sad that the next book won't come out till next year. The romance in this book, the twists and turns in this book, it is fantasy romance, and also there's like a little bit, I assume that they're kind of like dragons. There's a little bit of ancient animals that end up coming back or were never really died off and gone like everybody said they were. This main character, her name is Adelaide, and pretty much she's born into royalty, but she's the only daughter and the only child of this family, this kingdom, because her mother died in childbirth. So her father is trying to marry her into royalty as well, so she's guaranteed to be able to keep the castle. And pretty much she has this lifelong best friend that is her best friend, of course, and also turned lover. And they are about to get married when something in the prologue, which is like 20 pages long, something happens at the castle, at her castle. They are the only ones who grow this specific type of flower, so everybody's pointing a finger at them, and then war breaks out pretty much. And her guy, his name is James, saves her a little bit or takes her away, and then later on in the book, there's something that happens with him, and she ends up going to another village or another place. She crosses the Black Barren Sea, and she ends up on a whole nother land called Mare with some other guy. He's actually a king. And I don't want to spoil anything that happens, but this book was very interesting, very great, and it did end up on a cliffhanger, but not like a really bad cliffhanger, like one that makes you think. And I have so many possibilities for the next book. I am so excited for the next book. I've already hit up Brianna, like, I love this book. I'm so sad that I have to wait a whole nother year basically for this book. So if you have not heard this book, go look it up on Goodreads. If you want to read it, go order it on Amazon. It's like less than $20. It's amazing. It's so good. I'm not trying to hype up her just because I know her, but because it's actually so good, and it was 5 stars. Then at 334, I read the end of her. This is a thriller, and basically it's about this wife who has a husband and 2 kids, and they're little babies, and they keep them up all day long because they're colicky. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. She thinks, besides obviously the colicky babies, she thinks that she's got the perfect life. Well, then her husband has this ex, Erica, who comes back into his life randomly after they moved, mind you. And basically she's like, hey, by the way, if you didn't know, his first wife died because he murdered her. And she's starting up all this drama. You have to read about it because, you know, Stephanie, the actual main character, is worried. She's like, did I marry somebody who's going to kill me? Or is Erica just crazy like my husband says? So pretty much that's the whole book. And the twists and turns at the end, not gonna lie, they kind of got me. I seen a lot of things coming, but the very end, what the wife does, I was not expecting that. I put a reading vlog out. It's like 30 minutes long. You can go watch that because my reaction to that was like, dear goodness, I was not expecting that. And then there's also that part of me that was like, bad, very bad, idiotic bad. This book was a 4-star, very good book. The last and final book that I read was a 3-star read, and it was 306 pages. It is everything. This female main character, her name is Maddie. She is sick, she's chronically sick, and basically her mother keeps her in a bubble. Literally. Because on the back of the book it says, live life in a bubble or risk everything for love. And pretty much that's what she does. She lives in a bubble, she's sick all the time, or apparently she has an immune system that's terrible, probably because she lives in a bubble. She ends up risking her life because her nurse actually lets her new neighbor, who she ends up falling in love through a window, come over to her house, and they're sitting like feet apart, and basically they end up touching, like holding hands, you know, just touching like that, as she could get sick at any minute potentially. And then you are on this adventure because then she's defying her mother in a way by leaving, exploring Maui. So then she's in Hawaii, and then you get that. And I felt like this book was pretty decent. I loved this book. Like, I felt like it was super easy to read because it's 300 something pages, but at the same time it was so fast paced because there's literal photos. There's like pictures on the pages. And then some of the pages are like actual normal book length, and then others have like web things, or they're just so short. So I felt like this book went by pretty quickly. I just wasn't as invested, and the whole time in my brain when I kept reading this, I kept saying Gypsy Rose, Gypsy Rose, Gypsy Rose. I'm not gonna say what actually happens with this book, if anything actually happens, but I felt like I called everything coming, and then I wasn't as surprised at what did happen. It was just a good book to read, but it wasn't like an exciting, super great book, if that makes sense. No offense. That is all 12 books that I read and I did in this wrap up. And also real quick, I want to go over my TBR for next month. Who knows if I'm going to fully stick to it. First book we have is Renegade, so I may or may not be reading the series, and also I may or may not have been almost already done with this book. I have 100 pages left. I was trying to finish this book to include it into the wrap up. I didn't get there, but I may or may not be reading this whole series this month. Then I need like a little standalone, and I feel like I haven't read her books in a while, so I'm going to be trying to potentially read A Summer Affair by Ellen Hildebrand. Who knows? Like I said, some of her books are kind of iffy. They take so long for me to get into them. Then just in case, if she doesn't work out, I know I will definitely read his books, and I also have a lot of his books that I need to read. 2 by 2 by Nicholas Sparks. I don't mind Nicholas Sparks books, and I haven't read one in multiple months, so if I need a little pick-me-up, here we go. And then of course I added a series, but this series is 5 books long, and I'm reusing it from last month's TBR. I'm gonna potentially try and read the After series. Potentially, not promising, but potentially. Real quick before we end this video 100%, I just wanna say in this reading wrap up, I read a total of 3,915 pages. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for any other upcoming videos. I hope to see y'all next week, and God bless. My feet are dead.
Even when you